The Lerner and Loewe musical, My Fair Lady, became a movie in 1964, starring, of course, Audrey Hepburn and Rex Harrison. I know that a lot of you have seen it, and maybe again and again. And you remember the plot. A professor whose name was Henry Higgins discovers an uncouth flower girl, uncultured, not cultivated, and decides his project was going to be to make her into a lady. And then there's that scene where Eliza Doolittle sheds her Cockney accent and sings in perfect upper-class British English, "The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain." She goes to a ball and is taken for being a princess. But Professor Henry Higgins still looks upon Eliza Doolittle as a project of his, a creative success of his. And his friend, Colonel Pickering, says, Eliza is a human being. She has feelings. Why don't you treat her like that? But Professor Higgins will hear none of it. Now, that play, My Fair Lady, is in some ways like today's gospel set to music. They both involve two contrasting people. My Fair Lady involves Professor Higgins versus Colonel Pickering. The gospel involves Simon the Pharisee versus Jesus. And both the musical and the gospel center around the ability to see. In the gospel, Jesus asks Simon the Pharisee, "Simon, do you see this woman?" Simon says he does. But who is it that Simon the Pharisee sees? A sinful woman, someone to be despised and looked down upon. And how does Simon see Jesus? Well, as a phony prophet, because if Jesus saw what Simon sees, he would know the kind of woman that he's talking with. But Jesus sees. He's not subject to illusion. Jesus knows this woman had a past, a sinful past, the one who is now before him. But Jesus also sees the tears that are falling from her eyes as she kneels at his feet. And not just crocodile tears. She is gushing tears, enough to literally wash Jesus' dusty feet. And then she dries his feet with her hair. And she kisses his feet repeatedly. And she was not an invited guest to the dinner party, but she found out Jesus was there, and she did not come empty-handed. The gift was not for Simon the Pharisee, the gift was for Jesus. She brought an alabaster jar full of ointment with beautiful fragrance, and she anointed his feet, and the aroma was there. Jesus saw the fragrance of someone who wanted to repent. And he saw it an act of great love for him. Simon the Pharisee was blind. All he saw was the woman as she was, a sinful woman. And he looked at Jesus, and he thought Jesus, according to his vision, was a fraud. What was the defect of Simon and his vision? It was a defect that has been part of humanity from the beginning, since the sin of Adam and Eve, and it's one that can be part of our lives too. It's this: Simon put people in categories, and that's the only way he saw them. And don't people do that today? Seeing people through the categories of race, or gender, or age, or orientation, or marital status, or economic evidence, or past mistakes. That's how Simon saw. But the woman, how did she see herself? Clearly, as a sinner who wanted forgiveness. She heard about Jesus, and even though she wasn't invited to that dinner party at Simon the Pharisee's house, she made her way in. How bold! But she wanted forgiveness. Perhaps she knew of today's first reading from the Old Testament, second book of Samuel, about King David, who had sinned grievously, seriously, and on several counts. And at the bidding of the prophet Nathan, David admits, "I have sinned. God be merciful to me." And God forgave him. And then, in the second reading, we hear about another former sinner, Paul himself, as he writes to the Galatians. Paul certainly would have known about that reading about King David. He was steeped in the scriptures, and he probably knew about what we heard in the gospel today, about that unnamed woman. And Paul had sinned in his life, but he also knew the mercy of God. As he says in the reading, Jesus loved me and gave himself for me. Paul knew that his sins, now forgiven, would not determine a bad future for him, but he was called to the kingdom of heaven, and in his gratitude, he invited others along the way. So, in today's scriptures, we've got King David, we've got St. Paul, we've got the unnamed woman who washed the feet of Jesus with her hair, kissed them and anointed them, washed with her tears, dried with her hair. There are lots and lots of people throughout history like these, the likes of you and I. History has looked upon many of them as being below the standard, not reformable, unredeemable. But how does Jesus see? He sees them, he sees us as potential saints. In his mercy, Jesus sees us differently. He sees our past all the way up to the present moment, but he doesn't stop there. He also sees what he has called us to be and gives us the grace to become, to day by day become better versions of ourselves. And so, my fair ladies and gentlemen, The message I leave you today, I hope, is an encouraging one. And it's this: our merciful Jesus sees us sinners differently.